Hi, I'm Grace Lynch. Welcome to my channel. Um, I have to see a surgical consult for my arm today, and so I couldn't sleep very well, so I thought I'd make a video. This one is going to be about an issue that I see, a kind of blind spot in neurodivergent recovery that has to do with powerlessness. I know I'm in recovery. One of the challenges that I face that I didn't realize is uh, that although by the time I found out that I had autism, I had a great deal of experience in 12-step recovery, and so um, one of the first things that made a lot of sense to me um, was to consider my autism as something that wouldn't compromise with me, something that I'm powerless over. And so, in terms of generally making peace with my recovery, both from post-brain rehab and inside a life free of my particular forms of addiction, um, I found that there was this huge blind spot that uh, in which I could look for problems in my recovering life, but that and that those were ways to sort of do. How am I going to say this? There was a drive in me to solve problems, but there was a difficulty in making peace with my recovering life if I kept treating myself as if I were a problem. One of the challenging aspects of adjusting to being neurodiverse and the awareness of it was that as I took on the language of the terminology of neurodiversity, autism, and an understanding, a functional understanding of how it worked and how people talked about it, and I listened I listened to the book Neurotribes by Steve Silverstein, and I listened to there's a movie I think on YouTube about Temple Grandin. I listened to Dustin Hoffman talking about building the role for Rain Man. I looked up savantism, a whole bunch of different stuff. There's Oliver Sacks' book, Anthropologist on Mars, has Temple Grandin as one of the people he talks about, one of the chapters. And the problem was and then there was one final problem. When I listened to the models about neurodiversity, about autism, all the language I heard about it treated it A, as a problem, and B, in terms of a really complicated picture of what it was about. And as someone who actually experienced it, my difficulty was that in my mathematics education, one of the basic rules of thumb in theoretical mathematics in college that I was taught is that an ugly model for a problem is usually a wrong one. And so when I explored the meaning of my own neurodiversity, what the world was telling me was that it was basically defined. Neurodiversity was defined in all the ways I fail to be normal. I fail to be like other people. It frames all of it in terms of deficit, social disability, sensory dysregulation, all of these negative things. And when I did hear people talking about in a positive way, like in terms of giftedness and stuff, it wasn't a balance thing. It sounded like a giftedness, but framed in kind of a freakdom. In fact, the propensity to focus on savantism and have our giftedness be a part of further separation from societal norms sort of made being gifted also as a kind of negative thing. As I'm grappling with this and making peace with it, the more I learned about it, the more I found that I don't want somebody to see me in terms of some story they have about autism. I want them to see me. I learned of a quote that became famous in the autistic world. I haven't looked it up now for this video, but you can look up on YouTube. Some doctor person made the quote that became famous. If you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And yet there's these collective notions about what it is I find I have to deal with all the time in somebody else's thinking. And they're negative. So as someone who grew up during the 60s, 70s, and 80s, when it was the height of the AIDS crisis, I know very, very well what it feels like to be pathologized for being who I am. I know what it feels like to live in a world where I am only treated in terms of how a systemic core part of me is only a negative thing in the social dialogue. And I don't want that. I don't care why people thought that. I didn't want to be treated that way. I didn't want to have that be part of my self-talk. On the other side of being diagnosed, I have joked before. It wasn't really a joke. When I first learned from the neuropsychologist, Dr. Brad Lensman, that I'm autistic, my first thought was, so that's what's wrong with everybody else. And when I could process in ways that other people can't, and they get lost in things that I don't get lost in, I look at them like they're the ones with the disability. And the reason I don't frame people that way is because it hurts their feelings. That's not rocket science. So I realize that in terms of kindness, I don't frame other people in terms of being disabled, even though literally, logically they are. It's not a kind thing to do. And then I realize I don't want that back from society. And I can't use that taking in from the world for my self-definition, my self-concept of my neurodiversity. I had to come up with a different thing. And as I began exploring that in line with my continuing 12-step recovery, I realized there was this huge blind spot that when I'm looking at recovery, my 12-step recovery had trained me to look at the problem, the things I'm powerless over. The difficulty was that I was powerless over my addiction processes of choice that I had chosen in my life long ago, that had become addictions. And I was also powerless over how I process. The difficulty was the only tool I have for looking and exploring my powerlessness was in terms of a problem mentality. But if I want to make peace with my neurodiversity, I had to do that as a powerless thing too. The problem, the only tools of working with powerlessness treat it as only know how to seek problems. But the only part of me that knows how to understand my autism is in terms of powerlessness, and it isn't a problem. And so that was kind of a puzzle, because when I wanted to take my 12-step tools and use them to look at my neurodiversity, part of the psychology that I was using was beginning of grappling with it as if it was a problem to be solved, and it is not. And as I came to be with this and rest with it and explore it in myself, I came to understand that I actually had no functional ability to look at and stand in the perspective of my own powerlessness without jumping into the context of fixing it. The more that I sat with this, the more I came to realize that inside a perspective of powerlessness, in effect, I had a working addiction to fixing situations of powerlessness. I had to jump to an answer or a context, or I had to sort of put contextual pants on an awareness that I couldn't do something. I couldn't just be with not being able to do something. I had to fix it. But if I was going to make peace with that, then I realized that I needed to develop a new way of understanding myself relative to powerlessness and a new way to explore it so that I could be with it and sometimes use the powerlessness to understand new parts of myself and sometimes use it as things to fix about my life. And I'll do more in the next video. All right. See you soon.